So welcome to the food security and COVID session. We have 5 presentations. I propose that we go through the 5 presentations first and then have a discussion session at the end. Our first presenter is Professor Mariella Nocenti, who holds an aggregate professorship at the Faculty of Economics and the Faculty of Political Science, Sociology and Communication at Sapienza University in Rome. She works in the areas of customer behavior and satisfaction and social policies and cooperation. Professor Nocenti coordinates the International Observatory of Social Theory on New Technologies and Sustainability. She also serves as assistant editor of International Review of Sociology, among many other things. The title of the presentation is How to Communicate about Food and Health at the Pandemic Time.
Many thanks, dear Marx, and good morning to you all. I'm very happy to participate with my colleagues of the National Agency for Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Economic Development in Italy, that is ENEA, and I'm represent they in this presentation that propose some of the main evidences of our research. I can share with you my presentation. This presentation is more detailed than I can explain these main evidences of our research. This research, as Marx proposed in the anticipation, try to analyze how some specific social change, and I'm a sociologist, so I analyze this process of change, can affect some process as, for example, the communication about food and health. And the pandemic time is one of these occasions, one of these case studies for sociologists to analyze and to test how this social change can propose shift of paradigms in the interpretation of the social change and disaffection. As you can see in this presentation that thanks to the organizer, we can share with you at the end of this panel, we try to analyze the impact of the social transformation in the change of paradigm, especially connected to the specific sector of analysis, food and security in a pandemic time. We try to analyze, especially thanks to a case study that my colleagues from ENEA proposed, the research infrastructure method food, how this happened. And then the main goal is to verify if the languages, the practice of connection between different levels and different kinds of knowledge, for example, expert knowledge and then lay expert, lay knowledge and information, could represent a model of citizen science. In our speech, but better in this deeply analyzed presentation that we can show with you, we try to analyze how we can explain this hypothesis thanks to some factors and dimension of change. What are the key factors of this process of paradigm shift in a pandemic time? And then we enter into the analysis of the state case studies that we try to analyze, the method food research infrastructure that can propose a profile of citizen science. And citizen science as a model of analysis of this transformation could represent, in a pandemic condition, a very interesting case of shift of paradigm. We can see that for the first point, factors and dimension of social change, that for the social science, what is important is to measure, is to evaluate rapidity, direction, flow, propulsive force, and governability of the social transformation that affect what? The basic structure of the organization of society, as you can read, but what makes this very interesting event, important as social change, is the specific period and the declination in some dimension, what the dimension that you can read in this slide, that characterize this social fact as a social change. We can see that, for example, for pandemic, this happened in this month, in the last month. But what for the social science describe this pandemic time as a social change that can shift some important paradigms is the connection of some characteristics of our societies that makes a social change different from the previous social change. Now we live in a fluid networks of human action, in some relation between human action and non-human presence and identities. Our transformation propose a construction and deconstruction of our not so rigid cultural scheme, and it's not so easily for a human mind, or for a human model of process, mark the progress as human wanted or human proposed. We can conclude that for social sciences, individuals now know a social change where there are or where there is a certain range of alternative options or choices that can change this process, this direction of social change. The factors and dimension of this change could be represented by three very important levels or range of dimension: temporal, spatial, and relational dimension that we can use as perspective for the interpretation of the social change. You can read that time, space are fundamental for the interpretation of every kind of social fact. What is important in the contemporary society, so in our times, is the relational perspective. We live in an extended vulnerability and in the potentiality of our action. We live with other identities that are not only human, but for example, they are not only no human, they are animal. The pandemic, for example, has a basic reason, origin in our relation with the animal world. The zoonosis process is an example of this. So that the idea of the relational approach to analyze the social change is very interesting, as you can see also in this image, the robot or the mechanic identity that interact with us to manage a social change, to analyze how our relation, especially in the term of knowledge, could be different if we have different relation with our with the other actors of this process. We can see that the key factors of the expert and lay knowledge in a specific social change are very interesting to analyze how happen when in a social change determined by a specific fact that could be also pandemic, could be present different causes and different dimension of the happening of this social change. As you can see in this iconographic presentation, if we can compare number of cases and time of the transformation of the social change, what happened in the relation between individual and the other is characterized by the level of information and the type of knowledge that can affect this process. And the curve can change the rapidity, the governability, as you can remember from the second slide of this social change. What in the social sciences have analyzed in this shift of paradigm produced by the produced by the pandemic of some other social change is that some point of the traditional paradigm are not confirmed. Pandemic doesn't confirm the idea that we have evidence-based medicine that could be important for the managing of the pandemic, of the public managing of pandemic, of this social change, for the reason that you can read in this slide. So the precautionary principle is not the main or the unique principle or key factor or strategic element that we can assume to the manage of this social change. We have not scientific consensus, especially among epidemiologists, virologists, immunologists, about this managing of the social change. The social action oriented by the ethic of public are not so evident when we have uncertainty and when the potentiality of the change affect our action. The same scientific communication, that is the point of our research, change because discussion among experts are characterized by the relevance also of other level of knowledge and of comprehension of the scientific problem that are not the traditional scientific problem, because we have also, for example, the lay expert that could be important in our consideration. So what we can analyze as, or we can represent in our definition of this relational approach for the description of the social change is the iconographic model that in the cooperation and co-creation of knowledge we can represent in a specific field of research, the research of environment, climate, the use of our natural resources, but especially of food and of the security connected to the food consumption. In this case, we have translated this model in a specific case study, this method food infrastructure for promoting methodology in food and nutrition. That is a very useful case study in our opinion, because it's a freely accessible information services that is implemented, that has been implemented during the health emergency. We can say that the method of food infrastructure for promoting methodology in food and nutrition, as you can see in the mission, in their social actors, and in the alliance between 18 partners in Europe and some other third countries, is very interesting because the principal aim of the action of this platform, if we can compare this infrastructure to something that could be more intelligible, is to promote the quality of the result, the data, the information, the knowledge of the scientific aspect, but with a specific aim in the participation, in the equal participation of all the potential users, so that method food could be a model, especially a model that has been adapted to a specific social change that we can use as an example, a case study, but also as a model that we can describe as interesting for the definition of the model that we are going to present, the citizen science. We can say that for communicate science on food and health, the idea of the national agency, ENEA, during pandemic was to give the opportunity to know how this infrastructure can offer the world of researcher, the business also, but also the consumer, each other among all these actors. And the Meta Food Portal offer during the pandemic emergency official documents, scientific publication, but also fact sheets, recommendation, best practice that were available in different languages and that are collected and selected by scientific experts, the ENEA expert, but with a specific attention for the expectation and for the contribution of the lay expert. For example, Metafood have launched a campaign on social media, Facebook and some other social media, to inform as many users as possible, providing useful information and answer questions from producer and consumer about the correct diet during the pandemic emergency, or to fight possible effects of this of the pandemic of this virus. So that this is a very interesting model, because while the COVID-19 outbreak is a global public health crisis, it has led to a parallel pandemic of disinformation, because the risk could be that all this information about food and health, for example, don't match the expectation and the potentialities of scientific knowledge and of lay experts. So that, as you can see, the COVID-19 in agri-food and then in the experience of the Metafood information, try to avoid some specific effect that we know as the infodemic or the disinfodemic risk that a social change, not only in this case, could represent this specific sector of food and security. We can say that Metafood could be a very interesting model that in some case, in many cases, I want to highlight it, define the model of citizen sciences. In this slide, you have some of the most important definition, quotation about this model that is not so new, because as you can see, some very interesting insight could be referred to, I don't know, Irwin in the 90s. But what is important is that also citizen science has changed during this year. And now we can say that the idea that citizens are actively involved in research, in partnership, as you can read in this slide, with scientists and professionals, is considered as a resource for science and for scientific knowledge, and not something that is not so important or not so interesting for the palliated, for the scientists that are the veritas for the knowledge and for science. The second effect that we can represent in the application of citizen science in the current model of social change is that the positive effect of this involvement of the lay knowledge in the scientific process, especially for food security, could enrich not only information, but also knowledge of individuals. The lay knowledge can increase, can enrich, thanks to this involvement in a partnership with scientists and professionals.
Could you start to conclude, please?
Yeah, this is the last slide. Thank you, Max. This model of this citizen science classification and tool can represent how I can try to define in the interpretation of our description of Metafood and the evolution of the treatment of data, information, and knowledge among the community of scientists and individuals can represent what is the value of citizen science. As you can see, the values are holistic in our society, because they are not only scientific, not only connected to education, but very important for the policy making. And so we can understand the connection with the managing of pandemic and of social science, and in societal dimension of this transformation. These are some areas of application of citizen science in the current model of the citizen science, and these are the link that we can offer to you all for testing how citizen science in some model of collaboration during pandemic emergency can be typical of the transformation that we are analyzing in the food and security stream. These are all our contacts, and we are available for question and insight about some points that I have only synthesized in my brief presentation. Thank you to you all for the attention.
Thank you very much, Mariella. We will leave the questions for the end. I would like to move on to Dr. Alam, or Monirul, as he prefers to be called. He obtained his doctorate from the University of South. He works as an adjunct research fellow and head of Department of Agribusiness at the Faculty of Agricultural Economics and Rural Development at that same institution. He serves on the editorial board of a number of international journals and publishes widely in the areas of agricultural economics, agribusiness, and climate change issues. He will present on the impact of lockdown on vegetable supply chain and food security, empirical evidence from Bangladesh. Muthu seems to have difficulties right now. We will move to the next speaker, and we hope that Muthu can join us again. The third speaker in the session, and let me just double check if Paola Vera is here. Paola Vera graduated as an economist from the Autonomous University of Baja California. She's professor at the School of Accountancy and Management at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She currently coordinates a research project on the adoption of sustainability criteria in value chains in Latin America, and specializes in research on management, sustainability, and complexity. Her presentation is entitled "The Financialization and Food Security, the Effect of COVID-19 for the Latin American Region."
Good morning. Thanks for the introduction. It's our honor to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. We are Ricardo, Miguel, and me, Paola. Well, this is our agenda. We take by antecedent that financialization denotes the process characterized by the increasing weight and importance of finance. This process can be observed from three paradigms that are complementary to each other. As a long-term tendency, that is a process of evolution in which the role of money in the economy and society is progressively increasing, which is accompanied by structural change in institutions and society and technology, as well as financial innovation, which stimulates the flexibility of the exchange. Following virtually, this circular tendency is observed in periods prior to capitalism, although with less intensity. In financialization as recurrent phenomenon, one can distinguish periods of dominance of finance, of liberation of finance, and periods of the financialization or regulation of finance. Unless, as a unique historical episode refers to the fact that each historical context provides the phenomenon with particular characteristics that differentiate it from other times. In this sense, this is our objective. Finance has accompanied the food system for centuries. However, the current phenomenon has led to change that Club and Isaacson called dramatic. First, we observed new actors. The banks were joined by institutional investment and the agricultural commodity trading firms. Second, financial innovation occurs that represent a fundamental change. The new financial instrument loses its relationship with a physical commodity, leaving it only in the abstract. That is, if there are previously contracts associated with the agricultural commodity, for example, the commodity future contracts, which entitle holders to a specified quantity of a given agricultural commodity, has a specified price at future date. Now, financial instruments are offered that abstract from its physical form into a highly complex agricultural financial instrument, such as equity-based index fund that derive their value from change in an index trading that price of commodities, farmland, and agri-food firm shares. This structural change and financial innovation have led to the prioritization of shareholder value by companies, as well as the adoption of standardized behaviors that reinforce this ideology, which leads companies to carry out strategies that allow obtaining short-term profit that include financial activities as well as mergers and acquisitions, but to the detriment to growth in the long term. For example, because the expense of investment in product development is inhibited. Clapp and Isaacson point out that financialization in food system has contributed to the corporate concentration of power and health, which is reflected in the individualization of the agricultural risk. Agricultural risk management, less secure employment and livelihoods, in addition to higher and more volatile food prices, aspect which is linked to the other consequence of financialization, the loss of resilience. The higher and more volatile food prices expose farmers, firms, and consumers alike to greater vulnerability to economic shocks. In addition, the monoculture model has been favored, which has been related to the loss of biodiversity, greater vulnerability to pests and pathogens, and climate change, which together represent greater vulnerability to ecological shocks. The COVID-19 pandemic has occurred within this context of a financialized food system. As we know, the measure of confinement and restriction of mobility was necessary to contain the pandemic. However, they have had negative effect on the supply and demand of the food system, as well as general implication of the financial system. In the slide, we can observe some of these effects. On one side, there are effects on the internal operation of the companies, disruption in the supply chain, the crisis in export, loss of job or reduction of income that have an impact on economic difficulties for access to food. In addition, rising prices are insufficient supply of food. On the other side, drops in global equity market, capital outflow from emerging markets and developing economies, rising credit risk spread, the depreciation for many EMD currencies, all of which has intensified the problems that already arose in the food system.
Thanks. This financialization, together with greater liberalization and integration of financial markets, generates high volatility in exchange rates due to a broad inflow and outflow of capital from the economies, mainly by portfolio investment. As a result, the depreciation of Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico currencies from March to September 2020 were approximately 20, 22, and 13% respectively. This situation impacts production costs and prices of goods and services, as well as the planning and financial resources of companies in the food industry. Therefore, the crisis caused by the global pandemic lead to higher risk aversion in the financial markets, especially in the American market represented by Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, in which the market capitalization of the companies in the food and beverage industry moved away from the state of stability and growth to a drop of 30.7% from December 2019 to March 2020. Even though there have been an increase in its value of 7.4% from March to July 2020. It's still far behind from pre-crisis value. Therefore, this financialization increased the channels of transmission and the magnitude of the impact by investment expectation to the financial speculation. Next, please. Due to the impact on the supply by the financialization of the food system and the COVID crisis, food prices have increased since the pandemic. Therefore, food inflation for the first quarter of 2020 has increased in August by 8.8% and 7.4% in Brazil and Mexico, respectively, regarding the same month of the previous year. For its part, Argentina has shown a downward trend, perhaps due to greater weakness in demand, but keeps inflation levels in food of almost 50% year to year. Regarding the financial performance of companies in the food and beverage industry in Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, the results are presented in the metric of growth, profitability, and investment, considering the publicly listed companies of the industry in their respective countries. Comparing the growth rate of the first quarters from 2017 to 2020, revenues and profits shown a downward trend, which is perceptible since the first quarter of 2019, in which growth and operating revenues and profit had a fall of between 2 and 4% with respect to these values in the first quarter of 2018. In the first quarter of 2020, the decline is steepened due to the paralysis of the economy by the coronavirus crisis. The decline in gross and operating profits and earnings in this quarter was between 7 and 9.5%. In summary, the compound annual growth rate of the first quarters from 2017 to 2020 was negative, which implies lower levels of production close to 2016. Concerning operation and investment profitability, even though the profit margin and EBITDA remain on the rise in the first quarter of 2018 and 2019, by the first quarter of 2020, it slightly decreased, while the gross margin showed a downward trend across all first quarters from 2017 to 2020. The most serious case was the net profit margin, having a level of 3.7% in the first quarter of 2017 and representing a loss with respect to income about 0.2% by the first quarter of 2020. This profitability trend were reflected on the return on investment of the industry, with the exception of the return on invested capital. The return on assets and the return on equity showed a downward trend with 0.9 and 2.6% on the first quarter of 2017 to a negative rate of 0.1 and 0.2% on the first quarter of the 2020. Even for the ROIC, its rate for the first quarter of 2020 is lower than the average of the first quarter from 2018 and 2020 to 2020. However, the most worrying thing is the investment trend of the companies, since capital expenditure shows a significant downward trend in the first quarter of 2018, having a substantial fall of 22% for the first quarter of 2020. This behavior is congruent with the decrease shown by total assets in the first quarter of 2019 and 2020, which implies a negative geometric average of 0.6% from 2017 to 2020, in contrast to a negative geometric average of 11% for the capital expenditure. On the other hand, total liabilities, mainly liabilities with cost, that is financial debt, had a geometric average increase of 0.4 and 1.5% respectively on the first quarter from 2017 to 2020. Even though capital expenditure and total assets have decreased, financial debt has increased due to the drop of the revenue and the lack of liquidity. Or, on the other hand, they are taking advantage of lower interest rate of the market to modify its capital structure with low-cost financial sources. In any case, the industry becomes riskier due to its financial leverage, in addition to representing that it focuses its efforts more on its financial side and not on the supply and production of food and beverage. In conclusion, this situation, coupled with a drop in employment and income, generate less accessibility to basic food requirements for the general population, mainly the most vulnerable and poor. An humanitarian crisis is coming due to food inaccessibility and poverty, while the investment banks and institutional investors, such as hedge funds, achieve higher returns by speculating. Thank you very much for your attention.
That was a very important, a very interesting presentation. We here at, in my environment, we very often already talk about post-COVID, and I'm very happy that we have such a powerful presentation about what we're in and what is coming. Thank you. Thank you so much. Could I now please ask Monirul to hold your presentation? We have already introduced you, so you can just move right into your talk. Monirul?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for introducing me. Let me share my screen with you first. So, actually, it is my pleasure to be here with you in the 8th World Sustainability Forum virtual conferences. I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, and a good day. So I'm Dr. G.M. Monirul Alam and Musammat Nilupa Khatun from Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman Agriculture University, Bangladesh, is involved with this research and going to present our results. So I'm not going to tell the story of COVID-19 because we all know the story of COVID-19 and the devastating impact of COVID on economy and health system. So actually in the 21st century of knowledge and technology excellence, the planet was not ready to see the unprecedented situation caused by COVID-19. However, the poor people in developing countries such as Bangladesh are disproportionately affected due to COVID. It is mainly due to their poor income and inadequate health system. So we are talking about Bangladesh. So what is Bangladesh and where is Bangladesh? Let's see. So Bangladesh is a very poor, small country in the South Asia, and the population density is about 1,265 persons per square kilometer. So it is higher than India and China, though they have higher population than us. So we have a good success stories in many areas, including poverty reduction, but still we have more than 25% of population under poverty line based on the estimation of World Bank. So Bangladesh is a low delta-ing country and prone to many climatic hazards. And COVID compounded the vulnerabilities of the people who are already impacted by different climatic hazards. In Bangladesh, large number of people have to live in a single room or in a street or slum. So maintaining social distancing is very tough for Bangladesh, which is the key to stop the spread of COVID. You know, most of the people in Bangladesh live in rural areas and highly reliant on agriculture for their livelihood and food security. The country went into lockdown on March 26, and it was happened in a time when smallholder farmers were gearing up the harvest of Rabi crops. So the lockdown disrupted the food supply chain and increases the vulnerability of the households. However, the smallholder vegetables growers will be even more affected due to the perishability nature of the products. In Bangladesh, a large number of farmers, about 16.2 million farm households, covering an area of about 2.6% of the total cultivable land, are involved in vegetable cultivation. Due to income increase and the urbanization, the demand for vegetables has increased over the years. But now, for the COVID, the middle income group many of them has lost their job. So the demand of vegetables in domestic market has dropped significantly. So you can see some of the pictures of vegetables. In the bottom, you can see the traders are waiting for the consumers because there is the availability of vegetables, but there is a lack of consumer. Just the previous slide, they're talking about the reduction of demand. So here you can see the consumer demand also reduced due to income fall. So I'm going to show you the main findings of our study. We actually collected data from 5 villages from a district of Munirampur, which is one of the most vegetables growing areas in Bangladesh. So we collected the data in the early January 2020. And then after COVID, in May, we also collected data from the farmers using mobile phones. So using mobile phone, we collected data from the 30 farmers. So these farmers are the subgroup of the farmers we collected data in the beginning of this year. So you can see the result that lockdown impeded the farmers' access to market, limiting their productive capacities and selling their produce. Due to COVID-19, the price of yield has dropped more than half, resulted in loss for vegetables growers. So the loss incurred by the farmers for producing brinjal, cucumber, pointed gourd, eared gourd beans, and bottle gourd were USD dollar 144, 322, 1,687, 1,543, and 543 USD dollar per hectare respectively due to COVID-19. In Bangladesh, $1 equivalent to Bangladeshi currency taka 84. But in a business as usual case, they would get return of USD dollar 4,795, 2,533, 958, 2,205, and 3,737 per hectare for producing brinjal, cucumber, pointed gourd, eared gourd beans, and bottle gourd respectively. So this income loss has impact on their livelihood and food security. We'll go show you in the next slide. So this is the typical supply chain in the area. You can see that the producers are able to expand their market from local to export market. Usually more than 10% of their produce go to export market. But due to COVID, what happened now? You can see after COVID, the supply chain of vegetables. The farmers are forced to sell their vegetables to the consumer directly, and it is about 25% of their produce. due to COVID-induced lockdown or restriction, the Bapari or the other traders were not able to come in the local area. So the price of the product reduced or dropped drastically. As I mentioned earlier, that the vegetables growers incurred a substantial loss from their current produce. Yes, there are some stimulus package, but not for the vegetables growers. So the income from vegetables growers has also impact on their livelihood and food security. So the lower income from vegetables, we are talking about the growers who already incurred loss for their current produce. Most of the farmers, about 65% of their total household income comes from vegetables production. So the lower income from current produce forces many farmers to reduce the number of meals 3 times a day usually, and food items per day, and pose a huge challenge to continue produce. As one of the respondents stated that our livelihood is highly dependent on income from vegetables. The adult members of the family are bound to reduce the number of meals due to a drastic decline of income from vegetables. So what is the impact of this low consumption? If poor households are adjusting to income shocks by consuming less nutritious food and more cereals and turning to public food relief program for their survival. A prolonged consumption of less nutritious food might make them prone to ill health, sickness, which may ultimately lead them to missed out work and a further cycle of poverty. So without cash money, they cannot purchase seed, fertilizer, and other necessary input to start the production process for the next season. So what government can do for them? What policy intervention is required? So providing cash support is more important than the ongoing food support in order to keep them in farming. Another important thing is that they need to provide necessary inputs with low price so that they can start their production. So another problem for them to sell their produce, so we need to provide a platform that is called online platform so that farmers can sell their products. Supporting homestead, backyard gardening, that might be an important source of family nutrition and supplement of their income. And obviously, the social safety net program must be strengthened because they are the most vulnerable, and COVID have already marginalized many of them. So it is also important to ensure farmers' safe return to work through placing adequate testing and treatment facilities in their close vicinity, which is currently unavailable. You can see here is a farmer who is worried about harvesting his vegetables because there is a lack of demand and low price. They will not able to cover their production cost. So this is the scenario of all the farmers, particularly the vegetables who are deal with the perishable products. So their situation is more worse than other farmers, I think. Thank you so much for your patience hearing. So this is all about my presentation. Thank you, dear Chairman.
Great, wonderful, very interesting. An example from Bangladesh that reveals a surprising market dynamic, something that when I took about 100 years ago a course on microeconomics, I would have been surprised to find out that a reduction of supply actually was associated in Bangladesh with a reduction in price. Fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Please hang on. We hope to have some time left for questions, but before that, our next presenter is Cynthia Akwe, who is a senior lecturer at the Liverpool Business School. Her research focuses primarily on the field of business and management studies, and she published widely on issues relating to international business, marketing, and entrepreneurship and strategy. She will talk on the impact of COVID on Sustainable Development Goal 2 in Ghana?
Right, so I've already been introduced, so there's no need for introduction anymore. My research is on the impact of COVID-19 on Sustainable Development Goal 2 in Ghana. The key issue is to look at the outline of my study. So what I'm going to present today has the purpose of the research, the problem, the progress in terms of literature, methods and methodology, findings, conclusions, and then questions and feedback. Now, I'm talking specifically about Ghana. Ghana is a country in sub-West African region with about 31 million population. Now, this is the purpose of the research. So there are two questions that we asked regarding this research that was conducted. So what is the impact of COVID-19 on SDG2? And then how would they affect the different components or the various components of SDG2? Now, to be able to achieve our research aim and then answer the questions, the first thing was to look at literature that we have on the progress so far from Ghana, and then conduct a field study. And this field study was conducted in July. That is pre and after we've come out of lockdown in Ghana. And then we analyze it to determine the relationship between COVID and its impact on the achievement of SDG2 in 2030, and then draw implications, especially policy implications, to be able to achieve that. So let's look at the key issues when it comes to SDG2. I do a lot of sustainable development and sustainability research, particularly in developing countries and especially in Ghana. And as we all know that when it comes to sustainable development, we're looking at how societies can organize themselves to thrive in the long term, which includes current and future generation, in relation to assessing our socio-economic and environmental resources. However, when you look at the literature, you can see that in sub-Saharan Africa, there are barriers to achieving sustainable development. And one key aspect of that is extreme hunger, malnutrition, and poverty that contributes to it. And the goal of SDG2 is to end this hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture in developing countries. So prior to COVID, there was some progress going on. However, since the advent of COVID, you can see the COVID cases here worldwide. I put this data in today. This is today's data, 29.8 million cases, deaths, 939,000 deaths in the world. But look at Ghana. Prior to when this pandemic started, a lot of people thought African countries, sub-Saharan African countries are going to witness a lot of deaths because of the extreme hunger, poverty, and all the things that we have. However, to date, if you look at the data I have in Ghana, we have 45,388 cases, and only 285 people have died. The rest have recovered, and we have 800 ongoing cases. But the issue here is not just about the deaths, but the impact that it could have on the other aspects when it comes to achieving this goal. So we have mitigation circumstances. There was lockdown for some time, which was eased, and then closure of businesses, ports, which really have had significant impact on this, and then the reduction of human resource capacity and ill health. Now let's look at the progress before COVID. Right? So if you look at the SDG2, the targets in the second column say should achieve 2.1 universal access to safe and nutritious food, end all forms of malnutrition, double the productivity and incomes of small-scale food producers. So when we're talking about nutritious food, we're talking about you being able to eat, have the nutrients that you need, eat the right quantity of food to be able to stay nourished, so no malnutrition. Now, when it comes to productivity and incomes of small-scale farmers we have a difficulty defining them now. There are different definitions by FAO and the World Bank. The World Bank looks at small-scale farmers as producing on a land 2 hectares, and then with low assets or very limited assets to operate. So most of them are based on traditional approach to production. Now, let's progress here. And I have graphs to show on that. So you can see that target 1, for 5 years, from 0 to 5 years, some progress has been achieved. It's fair progress. Stunting has declined from 19% in 2014 to 18% in 2017. Now, target 2.2, end all forms of malnutrition, very weak progress. We have progress on overweight, have progress on underweight, but then when it comes to wasting, it's an area that is really not progressing. Now, target 3, double the productivity and income of all small-scale producers or production. That is very, very limited. Okay, we'll look at the graphs in a second. So my research is based on the fact that although there is this government report in June 2019 on the progress, it's not tagged to COVID because COVID happened after that. And that is the main research that we have about measuring the impact of COVID on SDG 2. So let's look at the graph. So you can see here, national prevalence of stunting among children under 5 years of age. You can see nationally, it has decreased considerably from where it started 30 and is around 12, 13 here. Then national prevalence of stunting among children under 5 years of age, 1998 to 2017. Please note that Ghana, at the time of this data was collected, Ghana had 10 regions. Now we have 16 regions now. So we have to note that. You can see that a lot of the regions are doing well, but then if you look at the northern and the Volta region, they are not doing very well when it comes to stunting amongst children under 5 years of age. Now, prevalence of malnutrition among children under 5 and by type, 2003 to 2017. You can see that we are making strides when it comes to underweight, and then overweight. But when it comes to wasting, is an area that we aren't doing well at all. Agriculture is another that we're looking at. And basically, if you look at, this is the FDI, foreign direct investment funding into agriculture. And starting from 2010, 25%, more than 25%, now coming to zero, basically from 2016 to 2007, zero. And this is an area where we need a lot of investment in, because if we need to end hunger and an increase in nutrition, alleviate malnutrition, these are areas that the government needs to focus on. Now, when it comes to agri spending and the government spending, in 2012, 5.9% of the national spending went into agri. This reduced in 2013 to 7.7. The data is not here. I'm talking about it. And then it declined after 2017. Only 4.16% of the national funding budget goes into agri. Obviously, we are not on a trajectory to be able to achieve what we want to achieve by 2030. So the key thing is, although we are progressing at a slower rate, now look at COVID coming in. What will be the impact? So what I did was to look at, this was research from a both qualitative and quantitative aspect. The general public was mostly quantitative. Policymakers, farmers, suppliers, supply chain, food producers were more of the quantitative approach. We use both phenomenology and survey, purposive and random sampling for our participants. And then mostly for the quantitative, we had descriptive analysis. And then for the whole, we have thematic analysis done. So let's look at the findings, which is the most important aspect. So on the core aspect, you can see that the key thing when it comes to the 3 targets that we have to achieve in terms of nutrition, there is reduction in the progress of nutrition, because although we were doing well, we realized that wasting was one aspect. Stunting in the northern region was still prevalent. The Volta region was still prevalent. So, and I want to go to the second one, end all forms of malnutrition. You can see that although malnutrition, we saw that something was being done about it. It has increased in most parts due to the lack of nutrients that is required. People are reverting to the basic food that they can be able to afford, and not all nutrients are within the food that they are eating. Now, productivity, temporary halt. So temporary halt on productivity due to the lockdown, lack of capacity, lack of finance, which has led to low productivity. Now let's go into the details on that. So why do we have issues with target 2.2, 2.1, and 2.2, nutrition and malnutrition? So high impact on individuals, households, and communities with low income, unemployed, and the poor. Now we realize that, I'll go into further data, so you see that people who have jobs like civil servants were doing better than people who had low income, households, especially traders, people in the service industry. We had a high, every country mostly had hits on their tourism sector. And in Ghana, a lot of people work within this sector. They are either traders or they are within the hotel industry. The ports were closed, airports were closed, etc. Restaurants. Now, people had reduced meals, some lack of food, basically, because there are unemployed who depend on others for their meals and their food, and they were also affected. Less nutritious to staple food, so carbohydrates, which leads to malnutrition, was high on the agenda. Lack of fresh and basic food, and reduction and lack of key nutrients. The key things that were identified from the interviews and then the survey was the lack of earnings, as we said. A lot of people lost their jobs. Lack of access to markets. This is on both sides, because the restriction means that you can't go to buy things. But then on the other hand, the farmers and the traders were also complaining because their wares were not being sold. An increase in food prices. Now, when it comes to agric, basically we said reduction in food productivity. What were the key issues? Remember, these are small-scale farmers who don't have a lot of assets, and they are farming on very small lands. Okay, they are using mostly traditional approach in farming. So the key thing was lack of finances, because they can't sell their wares and therefore there is no money to invest in that. Reduction in labor due to social distancing. They have to reduce the number of people who come onto the farm. Distribution, supply chain disruption, lack of import, lack of the key things they needed and demand. Now let's look at the key aspects. So look at the food consumption on patterns on weekly basis that we gathered from the public. You can see this.
Could you wrap up? Could you conclude, please?
Okay, so you can see that the civil servants were generally doing well, but then when you look at the farmers, the unemployed, self-employed and traders, they were the ones who were skipping a meal, right? You can see 30 people, 20, 32, they were skipping meals. Food prices went up 96%. Staple food like gari is made from cassava and it's one of the staple foods in Ghana. One thing that was realized, it increased 100%. Plantains, also another staple food, also 100%. So from 5 cedis to 10 cedis for 2 tubers of plantain, etc. Now, expectation of livelihood due to this. So now we are looking at in the future, because here we can see the expectations were actually with it during the pandemic. But in the future, they are looking at this as a key area, and they think it's going to have severe impact on them. Let me leave this one. What should the government do? The key thing is policy intervention areas. Now we know that the SDGs 17 goals are all intertwined, because poverty is leading to poor nutrition, is leading to health, lack of education. So if the government wants to improve, it means that they have to address all areas of the SDGs. Now, funding for nutrition is very important if we want to achieve it by 2030. There should be national agricultural policy and strengthening, putting money back into the agric area. We can also encourage public-private partnership. And then the most important aspect, because storage of their produce was one of the things, they were perishing, lack of demand for it. So therefore, it's important to move from the traditional cultural agricultural production to technological innovations that would help preserve food and then not use too much of manual labor, etc., to do that. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I'll answer any questions that comes with it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Our final speaker is Dr. Jassim. She is a researcher at the Faculty of Business and Accountancy at the University of Malaya. Her presentation is entitled Achieving Food Security in the Post-COVID-19 Era Through a High-Tech Vertical Indoor Farming in Densely Populated Cities.
Okay. Good morning and good evening, everyone, to this very warm welcome to this presentation on achieving food security in the post-COVID-19 era through high-tech vertical indoor farming in densely populated cities. I am Dr. Suad Jassim, and on behalf of myself and my co-author, Dr. Muhammad Razzaq, it's my pleasure to make this brief presentation. My presentation will be broken into the following sections. The background of this study revolves around the fact that food security has a major concern. Not just very recently, it has a major concern actually over decades. However, with advent and development of technology related to the agriculture production, it has been addressed to great extent, and many developing countries are now sufficient in producing their own food. Meanwhile, the weakness of the traditional food supply chain has elevated, and this has occurred due to the current pandemics triggered by deadly COVID-19 virus, which has brought global economies down to their knees. Accordingly, policymakers actually recognize that depending or relying on the bringing products produced from faraway open farms to densely populated cities will be more and more challenging in the future. And this actually has also been compounded by the fact that a large portion of the global population are moving to urban centers away from rural settings. Actually, World Health Organization predict that more pandemics in the future with viruses that are more virulent than COVID-19, alongside open natural disasters, and with the concentration of giving population in large cities, food security is a paramount concern. Moreover, according to the United Nations Fund for Population Action, predicted that by the year 2050, 9 billion people are forecasted to be residing in urban centers. Fortunately, there is solution, and this solution is the technology based. So this is actually what all my presentation about. First, I would like to present vertical farming to my audience. Actually, vertical farming looks at two legs. First, classification based on technology being used, and second is the classification based on structure that deployed to implement vertical farming. So let us look at the classification based on technology. We have a three broad system called hydroponic system, aeroponic system, and aquaponic system. I will go briefly to explain each system. In terms of hydroponic system, the plants are growing without soil. We have water-based solution that comprises of essential nutrients. The water solution is controlled through computerized system. In modern hydroponic system, actually, the state of plant growth, type of nutrients required in the water solution are all being what? All being monitored, upgraded, and managed by computerized system. This is simply all about the hydroponic system. Actually, having this type of system enable you to what? To grow plants indoor. You don't need soil and no need to be in the open field. Second technology called aeroponic system. In this system, you don't need to have a water solution like a hydroponic system. And instead, you need a spray that consists of nutrients, rich mixture of air and mist. These combinations are sprayed over the roots, and it's sufficient enough to allow the plants to grow in a healthy manner. This technology is very important and useful in regions of the world where water is scarce and costly to provide, such as in the hot climate, the Middle East, and also in extremely cold, such as the Arctic. Third technology is aquaponic system. This technology combination between hydroponic system and fish farming. Actually, as you can see, there is symbiotic relationship between fishes and the plants. The waste that generated by fishes serve as organic fertilizer for plants. And in return, the plants purify water from waste. For this type actually of technology can produce two cash crops, vegetables and fishes. Let's look at the structure, classified based on structure. Here we have two types of structures, building and shipping container. So vertical farming actually could be inside abandoned buildings, subway stations, parking lots, rooftops, or any space, even under skyscrapers. This type of structure doesn't require a large horizontal space. The second structure is conduct any type of technology that I just mentioned earlier inside empty shipping container. And this the good thing that this type of structure is mobile, so we can put it near a supermarket or any place that require. There is advantages and disadvantages of vertical farming. So let's look at the positive side. The first one is that it's required very small horizontal space, and a lot of vertical space can be used to yield multiple variety of crops. And also, in terms of the weather, we can't control it. So if it's very cold or very hot, that will not have an impact on the plants. Third, since it's indoor, so that no need to pesticides and herbicides, so that the products are free of toxins. And also, since the majority of procedures are computerized, so no many workers are required, and working environment is much safer. Application, the last one, application of advanced technology enables people to get real-time feedback on the plants in terms of their stage of growth, condition, and available finished goods inventory. The people who manage the farm, actually, they can sit in the remote place and actually determine the health level of plants and the general input and output of crops. I think this is really a wonderful advantage. Let's look at the disadvantage of vertical farming. The first one is that horizontal space in crowded cities are typically expensive, such as US, Shanghai. So this can be quite challenging. The second one, that consumption of energy and water in certain cities are expensive. And due to the organic government regulation, vertical farmers will not always be allowed to sell their fresh product as organic, making it very tough to compete with the traditional farm cultivated products. And also, since vertical farming depends on the technology, that means the products will be, the price of the products will be higher than the products that produced from the open field farm. The fourth, that despite the production of multiple variety in a small space, it consists mainly of the leafy products such as lettuce, spinach. This type of product have a quick turnover cycle. However, there is belief that with changing technology, this drawback will be overcome. Final disadvantage is related to what? To the pollination of plants. This requires artificial pollination, either manually or recently they have built small drones to do pollination. Moving on, there are certain challenges for entrepreneurs who don't have access to substantial capital. Big profitable companies such as Google and Amazon haven't invested in technology. Why? Because initially the technology was a testing phase and the return on investment wasn't actually clear. There are several challenges related with the encouragement of new entrepreneurs, especially for those who don't have substantial capital to get into this business. So let's discuss these challenges. The first challenge is that high initial capital is required because equipment and space are costly, not just like not stop until here, but also a lot of energy is required as well, which is expensive. Commercial banks also are typically reluctant to fund vertical farming project because it's still not clear about return on investment, as I mentioned earlier. There is a shortage also of technical and managerial human resources, which implies insufficient facilities for both entrepreneurs as well as workers who work in this field. So, how can we overcome these challenges and help entrepreneurs or bring new entrepreneurs to this business? First, the level of capital investment required is not just limited to equipment, it's also related to what? To space. So what's being recommended is that more research and development need to make in this situation. Government and local authorities have to team up with who's? With the private enterprise to do substantial amount, team up with the private enterprise to do substantial amount of research and development to bring down costs so more and more people get to this business. Second, besides developing farming technology, there is also a need for substantial financial support. Because as I mentioned earlier, banks are not keen on investing. What is required is seeds and growth funding. If there is a cooperation between the government and enterprise to fund this type of project, we can overcome actually this challenging or the obstacle. Third challenge is actually due to the issue to space access. Private property owners actually will hesitated to use the space for such a project. So what's required here? The governments and local authorities can actually help entrepreneurs to get access to this the buildings, or provide for them the space for the vertical farming. So in a nutshell, the problem with rising population within urban centers are known, and turmoil created by phenomena such as COVID-19. This long-term struggle need to be actually addressed as it acts as a threat to food security. Fortunately, vertical farming does offer actually the solution, but in order to overcome the challenges and hence attract entrepreneurs, government and local authorities again have to provide financial support, access to the space, and also encourage substantial amount of research development, which is the main important. Thank you for your listening.
Very good. Thank you very much. We do have a few minutes for questions, and Eden Andrews asks a question to Dr. Alam. Was the observed change in trend in vegetable supply chain during the lockdown the same for other types of produce such as meat or grains?
Not likely, because vegetables is a perishable products. And as I mentioned, that due to urbanization and income raises, the demand for vegetables has increased over the years. But due to COVID, many people, particularly the middle income people, have lost their job. So they have no income. So necessarily the domestic demand of vegetables has reduced tremendously. Mm-hmm. So it is not, this supply chain is not applicable for other types of products in Bangladesh. Yes, the livestock and fisheries sector also gone some changes because they are also perishable products, but not like vegetables. And
why not?
Other point I would like to mention you that, yes, the producer are not getting the higher price. On the other hand, consumers are not able to buy the vegetables in less price, because due to lockdown or travel restriction, the transport cost is high. So on the one hand, the farmers is not getting the fair price. On the other hand, consumers are paying the higher price for vegetables.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a question from Denise Meyer to Dr. Yassin. Are there examples of successful urban vertical farms? Are there examples in your region, in your country? Some that make sense both economically and from a sustainability perspective?
Actually, the Aero Farm, they conduct vertical farming, and they are successfully in terms of economic and sustainable. But they are just, I can't say they are few. For example, the more the Aero Farm is the one that very known with the vertical farming.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. I have one final question, and that is, in previous sessions as well as yesterday, we heard quite a lot of arguments against large-scale international foreign direct investment. Can any of the presenters of this session maybe make a counter-argument why foreign direct investment may be necessary, not in general, but for the project or for the product that you're looking at specifically? What is the case for large-scale foreign direct investment with regard to the issue that you're looking at? Cynthia, yeah.
based on what I'm looking at, is basically not for small scale production of farmers, because I'm looking at small scale, right? How to improve the small scale farmers' work. And I don't think large scale foreign direct investment will be important for such small scale farming. It should come from the national or the government itself.
Okay, very good. That concludes our session. We give way to the next session that is coming up, chaired by Marcel, Agri-Supply Chains.